scores of protesters in streets across the country. A looming presidential election. Violent standoffs between law enforcement and the citizens they had sworn to protect. And, amid the prospects of political and cultural change, a chilling and inescapable backdrop, thousands upon thousands of Americans dead. The summer of 2020 was, by any stretch, a historic one. But for some it's a season that feels remarkably like the summer of 1968. Instead of President Trump, it was Lyndon B. Johnson, succeeded by Richard M. Nixon. The tragedy that cost American lives was not a pandemic but the war in Vietnam. Racism was central to the protests. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated just months earlier, but so were a relentless draft and demands for peace. In late August, tensions culminated in Chicago, in the shadow of the Democratic National Convention. The National Guard, U.S. Army troops and 12,000 Chicago police officers were mobilized against 10,000 demonstrators. Who, yes, were called outside agitators, then, too. Everything since Chicago, the New York Times journalist Tom Wicker wrote 1 year later, has had a new intensity, that of polarization, of confrontation, of antagonism and fear. 7 organizers, give or take, emerged as leaders whom the federal justice system could indict. Their contentious slog through the courts is dramatized in Aaron Sorkin's The Trial of the Chicago 7, which began streaming Friday on Netflix. Sorkin, who wrote and directed the film, stayed relatively close to the facts of the case, tongue-twisting Sorkinese aside, and pulled some of the dialogue straight from courtroom transcripts. But for everything that doesn't fit in 2 hours on screen, here's what to know about the case and its defendants. Demonstrators at the convention were not a monolith, but a collection of several factions, among them, the Youth International Party, or Yippies, Students for a Democratic Society, and the National Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam. All were focused, at least in part, on pacifism and ending the war. The Chicago 7 were prominent faces in the various groups. Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin in the film, Sacha Baron Cohen and Jeremy Strong, were founders of the Yippies, a party which, like its leaders, had a flair for the theatrical. At one point in the trial, Hoffman and Rubin showed up sporting judicial robes matching those of the judge, Julius Hoffman, Frank Langella. The two Hoffmans were not related, which did not stop the defendant from calling the judge his illegitimate father in court. David Dellinger, John Carroll Lynch, led the National Mobilization Committee and was 2 decades older than Hoffman, the next eldest defendant. At the trial, The Times wrote in Dellinger's obituary in 2004, he loomed over his co-defendants in age, experience, heft and gravitas.